Welcome to this explainer. If you work in healthcare analytics, trying to find truly reliable information on hospital medicines can honestly feel a bit like charting unknown territory. So today, we are going to map out one of the absolute most vital resources you have, the Provisional Secondary Care Medicines Data, or SCMD for short. We're going to decode its structure, lay out some best practices for querying it the right way, and crucially, we're going to future-proof your pipelines against some massive schema changes coming down the pike.
Okay, let's just dive right in. Here's our agenda for today. First, unlocking the SCMD dataset. Second, standardization with SNOMED and dm+d. Third, avoiding the indicative cost trap. And finally, navigating those 2026 data model changes.
All right, Section 1, Unlocking the SCMD Dataset, the Data Landscape.
So what is this dataset exactly? Well, it's essentially the foundation of our map. It captures the exact quantities of medicines issued by pulling transactions directly out of pharmacy stock control systems across NHS secondary care services in England. We're talking acute, teaching, specialists, mental health, and even community trusts. It's provided to the NHS Business Services Authority by a company called RxInfo, and it is published monthly. But, and this is a big but, keep in mind there is a strict 2-month retrospective delay. So basically, your queries for January aren't going to yield any results until March.
Now, you'll often see this data split up into two distinct categories, provisional and finalized. The provisional SCMD is that monthly release we just talked about, which is absolutely fantastic if you're trying to spot early trends. However, RxInfo actually does a complete, full annual refresh 2 months after the financial year closes, and that creates the finalized SCMD dataset. So best practice here? Query the provisional data for those immediate right-now trends, but always point your historical reporting tools to the finalized version, because it includes all those really crucial backtracking adjustments.
Right, so just as important as knowing what's in the dataset is knowing what is completely excluded from it. The boundaries here are very strict. The SCMD dataset does not include medicines prescribed in primary care, so no GP surgeries. It entirely excludes private healthcare providers, and, really importantly, it excludes NHS prescriptions that are supplied by hospitals but actually dispensed out in community pharmacies. If your analysis relies on those areas, you're definitely looking in the wrong dataset.
Moving on to Section 2, Standardization with SNOMED and dm+d, the universal language.
This brings us to a huge foundational concept you need to know, the virtual medicinal product, or VMP. Medicines in the SCMD dataset are formatted using the Dictionary of Medicines and Devices, usually just called the dm+d. What the dm+d does is it standardizes medicine names, giving us incredibly precise definitions for clinical terms. And this isn't just to keep things neat and tidy. This standardization is absolutely critical for interoperability. It's literally what allows this dataset to communicate flawlessly with electronic health records and clinical decision tools across the entire healthcare ecosystem.
And this number brilliantly illustrates exactly how this works in practice. When you're in the dataset, you're not just going to see a text field that says paracetamol. You're going to see a VMP SNOMED CT code. That big, abstract 17-digit number you're looking at, 42109611100011109, is the universal key. In the dm+, that specific string of numbers anchors directly to paracetamol 500 mg tablets. So when you're writing your SQL queries, using this unique identifier is just an absolute best practice to make sure you're accurately aggregating medicines.
Okay, Section 3, the indicative cost trap, navigating the quicksand.
I want to ask you a crucial question right now, and think about it for a second. Can you use the SCMD dataset to calculate the actual spending of NHS hospitals on medicines? Think about what you might intuitively expect from a dataset that covers pharmacy stock. Well, the answer is a massive, definitive no. You must never treat the cost column in this dataset as an actual financial ledger. The costs provided here are strictly indicative. The actual real-world costs simply cannot be displayed. Let's dig into exactly why that is.
So the indicative cost is really just a derivation. It's calculated down to that VMP level using standard community pharmacy reimbursement prices for generic medicines or just standard list prices for branded ones. What it completely misses are the invisible market factors. NHS hospital pricing contracts and NICE patient access schemes are highly confidential, so this dataset entirely excludes all those confidential discounts, procurement agreements, and rebates that hospitals are actually paying. Because it's missing all those crucial deductions, the indicative cost is going to inherently, and sometimes wildly, overestimate total NHS hospital expenditure.
And honestly, the trap goes even deeper. You might be sitting there thinking, okay, well, the absolute totals are wrong, but I can still look at the percentage growth over time, right? Nope. Wrong. Cost growth estimates and trends have to be interpreted with extreme caution. Because those confidential discounts fluctuate over time, they mess with both your baseline spending and your growth rates. Your observed trends might not represent actual NHS expenditure patterns at all. The takeaway here? Use this data for volume trends all day long, but treat cost queries like absolute quicksand.
All right, final section, navigating 2026 data model changes, the shifting ground.
So here is the timeline of the tectonic shifts heading our way. Honestly, it's the kind of thing that gives database administrators nightmares. We're going to see significant schema changes introduced starting with the July 2026 provisional data release. Now remember that 2-month retrospective delay we talked about? Because of that, these changes are actually going to hit the live data around September 2026. For the finalized SCMD dataset, you won't see these changes reflected until the July 2027 update, which covers the April 2026 to March 2027 period.
Consider this next part your vital cheat sheet. Several column names are evolving to be a lot more precise regarding that virtual medicinal product standard. For example, unit underscore of measure underscore name is getting a prefix, becoming VMP UDFS unit of measure name. Same deal for the identifier column, which maps over to VMP UDFS unit of measure identifier. And that final quantity column, that updates to total quantity underscore in VMP underscore UDFS unit of measure. Basically, if you have automated ingest scripts looking for the old headers, you need to update your mapping right now.
But listen, it's not just simple renames. There are brand new additions and some really critical structural shifts. We're getting 2 entirely new columns relating to unit dose, the VMP unit dose unit of measure name, and the total quantity for that unit dose. But here is the massive red flag for your data teams: the data types are changing. Right now, you're probably storing those big 17-digit SNOMED CT codes and the unit of measure identifiers as integers, right? Well, in the new schema, these fields will be provided as string data types. If your ETL pipeline enforces strict integer typing on ingestion, that September 2026 poll is literally going to crash your system.
Which leaves us with one final, undeniable reality. We've mapped out the SCMD landscape, we've learned the language of dm+d, we've exposed that tricky indicative cost trap, and we've charted the upcoming schema shifts. But just knowing the map isn't enough. You actually have to navigate it. So I leave you with this. How are you going to update your ETL pipelines to handle the July 2026 schema update before the new strings and column names completely break your queries? The clock is ticking on this one. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and happy exploring.